Yeah, sorry, the technical issue there. But yeah, good morning, everyone. Matt Griffiths, I'm a third year student at Durham University. And my dissertation looked at an assessment of the motivation environment in men's football academies and its impact on motivation upon deselection. So what we're going to go through today is slides to work. Oh, sorry, technical issues. Slides to work. The reason behind the study and its aims, how the study was done, the results from the study, and a brief discussion on this, limitations, implications from the results, and then some brief questions after. So the origin of the study really came from what is now publicised both in academia and the general media about the wide deselection rate in academy football, especially. And then speaking to friends who've been part of this process, they spoke to motivational struggles after leaving the cell. However, this was not really identified within the literature. There's some element of it within Olympic pathways and how deselection from them talent systems can cause motivational effects, but none specifically in football. So using building on that work that looked at space psychological needs theory, a sub theory of self-determination theory, and learning about it within my studies, I decided to assess the environment based on these three needs, which are competency, relatedness, and autonomy. Competency referring to how well you think you perform and how good you are at your chosen skill. Relatedness in terms of how you feel towards your peers, how you feel relationships are. And then autonomy, people sometimes misconstrue it in terms of independence, but that doesn't transcend particularly well across cultures. Instead, it's more how an activity or participating in an activity aligns with your goals and identity. That seems to translate better across cultures. Consequently, research aims to explore the three needs in former academy footballers, and then the overarching understanding of the climate and how it affects re-engaging in the sport post-deselection. To carry out the study, we stuck to strict recruiting criteria. Just to elaborate on the men's football, unfortunately, the lack of literature around female academies and the sort of developing infrastructure meant that for undergraduate dissertation, it wasn't particularly possible to go in the greater depth. But hopefully it will be done in the future with greater evolving research on the women's game. Participants were invited to 45 to 60-minute interviews. And then these were transcribed and analysed using interpretive phenomenological analysis, which essentially, if you look at something like a questionnaire, gives a really great breadth of research. Looking at this smaller sample, we only had 5 participants, for example, gives a bit more depth, and we can explore really the differences between them and give a bit more context rather than an overarching figure. So the first result that we saw discussed was autonomy and its impact on the environment. So within the academy itself, players described the need to identify as such and have that identity as a driving factor in their participation to succeed, as shown by the participant quotes here. Again, linking to the autonomy of I identify as a footballer, I'm in this environment that's highly professional. I expect these certain levels. The issue comes with this and a loss of autonomy and a dissatisfaction of that autonomy, rather, when they leave the academy. Is the top quote here by participant 5. It's you're in an academy you identify so as a professional who gets programs, who has this standard of pitches, environment, blah, blah, blah. Then you're in a situation, an environment in semi-professional football, for example, it isn't like that. So there's a discrepancy between the professionalism and how they perceive themselves and their environment, thus compromising this need. However, it's not all participants. For example, participant 3 didn't have this goal or this alignment with them, so didn't feel that compromise on autonomy when moving, which sort of strengthens the argument that to view autonomy in this way. The second theme looks at conflict between teammates, specifically sub-theme of conflict through competition in terms of this paradox between the academy, your teammates, but you've also got to compete for contracts. There's only so many amount of scholars and professional contracts that the academy hand out. So there's tension around that, especially around key times in the cycle, such as under 16s for scholarships and under 18s for professional contracts. This then transcends into the career transition men's football in terms of you're playing with adults now where you're just being around kids, so it doesn't feel like that relatedness there. They don't have the same life experience, discrepancy in attitudes, maybe in social activities. This is furthered probably by the directional relationship from the senior players as well. Often view them as lazy, almost pre-Maradona, as it's been described by participant 3 here. But that may be because of that lack of determination from what I'm hopefully illustrating is an environment that is difficult in terms of the 3 basic psychological needs and provides challenges. So it's sort of a harsh cyclical structure in that way, with adapting to a men's dressing room. Finally, the third theme was sort of this unattainable individual competency of something with ever-moving goals. Once you start, if you move up, start for the 18s, or get on the bench for the 18s, you then want to start. Then you want to start a full game. Then you want to move to the 23s and bench. It constantly goes, and it's ever-moving goalposts and that unattainable competency, if you will. Which, as alluded to with previous presentations on perfectionism and how that's orientated, can result in burnout. Another thing that was sort of another element that was discussed within the interviews. Then, when moving out of it and transitioning into the academy, some participants felt a change in their orientation of what they perceive as performance. So, as seen by the top quote here, it's no longer forms a focus on the individual, how the individual performed, but actually the team. And it actually, what it shows is a greater level of enjoyment. But again, sort of the individualistic nature of this problem, that participant 5, for example, didn't like it, didn't like the new environment. It wasn't competitive enough. The standard wasn't high. And there's actually a decrease in motivation there. So again, you're seeing the sort of complex problems with the issue. So limitations and general overview and lessons. Limitations, undergraduate competency. It's my first time doing research. A lot of lessons on the way. So again, further research on this would be done a better way and probably a more specific way. I've covered a lot of points today. So helping that would further forward. Generalizability results. Ideally, we'd have got the themes out to a wider cohort to then confirm what we call naturalistic generalizability. Unfortunately, due to the amount of time it took and the undergraduate nature, that wasn't possible. And as I've alluded to, this issue is although there's a general psychological needs, appraisal of this can be individual, which could be affected by identity, personality factors. So it is very individualized and complex to generalize and overall. But overall lessons, as I alluded to, it's the identity, the autonomy as a point in the overall goals, relationships with teammates, that transition, how that affects individuals, and overall, what's the orientation of success? What is competency? Which differs between people in that transition as well. Finally, I'd like to thank the staff at Durham, particularly Patrick Jacariah, my dissertation supervisor, all participants who took part, Tracy and Amelia, and all the team here for inviting me. Really enjoyed talking about research, massive passion of mine. All viewers, you guys for paying attention. Hope you've enjoyed it. Any questions, I'd love to take them. If not, you can always contact any of my social medias there or scan the QR code. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Matty. Thank you so much. Super interesting. I know that I've spoken to you a lot about your research, so I'll open up the floor for questions. We've got a point in the chat, but I don't know why I was echoing there, but very important point: the transition from academy structure to the professional setup, basically poor in the UK. I agree, and come out in my research as well. Any questions from the floor? Don't have to let him off lightly because he's a student. He knows his stuff.
Making it too easy for me.
I know. Okay, Matty, I'll give you a quick question then. In terms of what you found and the applied implications, what would you foresee as being a good intervention or a good strategy to overcome some of the issues that you discussed?
I think there's a wider issue in terms of how we can affect the issue from academy side. I think a lot they have probably a monopoly over it, and how much we can change that is probably limited. However, coaches here or in wider sort of semi-professional or university settings, I think for them to be aware of how hard the transition is and or motivation, again, reconceptualizing this idea of laziness, I don't think it's particularly fair. I think it's a complex issue. So I think educating coaches, particularly at the lower levels where these selected players will go into around the struggles, I think will really aid again the transition process and help that awareness.
Okay, brilliant, very good answer. Thanks, Matty. Thanks everyone for listening, and we're going to move on now to some Rudy Sonner.